Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Citizens Bulletin, Know Your Role as an Informed Pennsylvania Citizen. I'm Susan Locke, welcoming you to the program, and our host today is Ashley Klingensmith, who is the Pennsylvania State Director for Americans for Prosperity, and her guest today is Dwayne Lester. Ashley, are you there?
Yes, Susan, thank you so much for having us. We are excited to be joining you, and a big shout to everyone listening this morning.
We're very glad to have you with us today and looking forward to what you have to share.
Wonderful. Well, I am excited to be here, and, I think it is timely to have a member of our foundation join us on Citizens Bulletin to talk just generally about what they are up to, what sort of programming they have expanded and developed in this new year. And then I'm going to specifically let listeners know an awesome program that they are going to be facilitating, training that they're going to be facilitating at this year's Pennsylvania Leadership Conference, which promises to be the biggest yet to date. Mm-hmm. And so I think in such a critical year as 2020, all of the skills and insight that we can gain for those of us who are on the front lines in advocacy and policy and political work, the better. And so I am excited. I always like to start with talking about our vision for Pennsylvania, and that is a Pennsylvania with robust free markets where a bias against erecting barriers to opportunity exists, and thriving communities where people succeed by helping one another are the norm rather than the exception. And so in that pursuit of that vision, you all know as listeners of Citizens Bulletin what we do. We have engagement directors across the Commonwealth that are in communities in their region 365 days a year, looking to identify, educate, and then ultimately mobilize grassroots activists in helping us get closer to that North Star, that vision of Pennsylvania being a place where the folks under the dome really have a bias against putting up barriers that keep us from reaching our potential. And those look very different when you look at the different policy buckets that we work in. So when it comes to economic opportunity issues, when they propose legislation that limits, for example, the ability for a nurse practitioner to practice on her own, maybe in a rural community that's underserved because there's no nearby hospital or no nearby physician. That's a barrier that government has put in the way, that Harrisburg has put in the way, because nurse practitioners here are not able to practice without a physician overseeing them. And so we're working to break that barrier down when it comes to economic opportunity issues. And then you think about criminal justice reform. We've talked about the fact that in Pennsylvania, there are individuals who have been deemed absolutely no threat to society and public safety, but who are languishing on probation terms that exceed, in some instances, 2 decades. And so when we talk about probation reform and freeing people up to pursue whatever their version of the American dream is, we talk about putting caps and limits on probation terms like so many other states across the country have. But when we do that and when we engage in some of those fights, our role is to equip people with the best tools and tactics available to make their voice heard and scale their voice with the most efficient and effective strategies that are available. And that's where our Grassroots Leadership Academy comes into play. They are a project of our foundation, Americans for Prosperity Foundation, our 501c3, and they essentially oversee an entire portfolio of programming that is designed to help grassroots activists be leaders in their community. And so there are a series of avenues that the team at Grassroots Leadership Academy can explore with folks looking to become experts on just messaging, or whether they want an entire series of events around how to become an effective grassroots activist or grassroots leader. And so I'm going to let Dwayne talk a lot about that. But he is one of, I think now their team has exceeded that 40 number mark, which is incredible. And he is Senior Content and Development Manager. And he has been with us. Goodness. Well, Dwayne, I'll let you talk about your tenure with the Grassroots Leadership Academy, and if you'll talk with listeners a little bit about yourself, that would be great. You have a fascinating background, and then just maybe we can talk through some of the offerings through GLA, and then we'll talk about your coming visit to the Keystone State.
That sounds good. I can definitely do that. One of the things that you mentioned, what we do, I think one of the things that I've seen in working with GLA over the past 4 years. I'm in my 5th year with GLA. But one thing that I've seen, regardless of where we've been, whether it's, teaching in New Mexico or up in Pennsylvania, even out in Nevada, Florida, wherever, one thing I've seen is there are a lot of people who don't really realize what freedom is anymore. That's been one of the biggest problems I've noticed, is that people don't know what freedom looks like. And if they were to see it, it would terrify them. And there seems to be an idea out there that a lack of government action is equal to a lack of action itself. And so one of the things that I enjoy doing with the Grassroots Leadership Academy is getting out there and helping people see the alternatives to government action. We believe, like you said, in breaking those barriers. And often people see the only way to break a barrier is through government action. But there are other institutions out there that could take action and often do it more effectively, because often with a government action comes a barrier to progress we might not have seen. So our catalog of trainings, it covers a lot of philosophical things, like what does freedom look like? What if government didn't do that? But it also gets over into specifics on issues like you mentioned before, criminal justice reform, all sorts of different issues that we deal with. But a third very important component is, how do you take action on those? How do you make a change? Because we can give people a vision of a better state. We can tell them what good looks like. We can describe it. We can even walk them through all of that and open their eyes to it. But if we don't give them a realistic path to get there, if we don't say, and that can happen if you follow these steps and do these things, then all it sounds like is a pipe dream. They've got to have those skills to be able to make those effective changes. And that's what we do.
That's awesome. And do you find that you, as our kind of issue set has expanded, have you been able to work with a broader kind of contingency of coalitions, of individuals on, maybe, I think here in Pennsylvania about our work in criminal justice reform, we have what I kind of call courageous collaborators, where there's maybe not a whole lot of work that we would do on other issue sets, but when it comes to criminal justice reform, we're one another's go-to partners. And so they've become these kind of daily contacts for me, where in the rest of the work we do, we've not found a whole lot of common ground, but with this we have. And so I'm wondering if you have found the scope of individuals in activists that you're working with in other states to have broadened as our issue set has broadened. And what does that look like? How has that kind of been, I guess, operationalized?
There's a couple of things that come to mind with that question. First of all, yes, there is that change. And I think a lot of it stems back to a Frederick Douglass quote that that has been guiding a lot of our collaborations lately. And I don't know if I'll get it exactly right, but basically it says that we'll work with anyone to do good and no one to do evil. And there may be times when we'll work with someone that traditionally, you might not think of working. And we've had to confront people with this idea. And initially, they're oppositional to it. But then when you explain, look, we can get things done like this, they're open to it. There's a quote that Ralph Nader, I quote Ralph Nader, he was on stage in St. Louis at Lindenberg University. He was on stage with Grover Norquist from Americans for Tax Reform. Ideologically opposites. One's left, one's right, but they were on stage together and they were both denouncing cronyism. They both hate government handouts to corporations. And Nader sat there on stage and said something that I have not forgotten. He said, "Nothing terrifies a politician more than the left and the right united against them." And
yes, absolutely.
So when you see things through the lens of let's get something done, not let's only get things done with our tribe, then it shifts from who gets credit to who gets things done. And I think that's been an important change in what's getting done these days with our organization. And the way that manifests is the people who are sitting in the audiences. And you find a more interesting crowd, let me put it that way, because we've seen things change over the past few years to having a different audience that we're talking to. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know, based on some of the feedback and emails that we've received from listeners of this show, there is a broad ideological spectrum that's represented by Citizens Bulletin listeners. And we want you to know that no matter where you kind of fit on that political spectrum, left, right, or anywhere there between, I think there is a Grassroots Leadership Academy offering that is going to be helpful no matter kind of where you lie in that space. And so as an entity of our 501c3, our programming is really skills-based and tactical. And so what you're able to do is translate what you learn and apply what you learn to whatever issue set is dear to your heart. And so even if it's something that maybe at our sister organization, Americans for Prosperity, we don't activate on or work on, that doesn't mean that what you have learned from trainers like Dwayne, one of his many colleagues, that you can't apply that to what you want to work on and what you want to activate on. One of the things that I think is so great that is accessible on GLA's website, which is GLA.AmericansForProsperityFoundation.org.
We're working on getting a longer URL. We're looking on getting a longer URL for everyone.
Yes, but they have a blog, and it is really a really great blog, and they also push some of that content out on their social media channels. So if you have Twitter, definitely follow them. It's at GLA Training. And if you have Facebook, you can find them by searching their page, which is just at Grassroots Leadership Academy. And they share a lot of their blog posts on those two channels. But they have a great post that they did last spring called How Activists Should Talk About Our Judicial System. And there's just a lot of great material there that's just readily available to the general public. And so I really encourage you to check that out. Dwayne, can you just talk about when it comes to your certifications? We actually have one happening this weekend, a level 1 certification, which is the Grassroots Activist certification. We have that happening in Williamsport with a group of folks Friday and Saturday. But can you just tell us a little bit about that series of certifications and kind of how that looks if folks have interest in those?
Well, it's 6 different topics, 6 different presentations, basically, starting off with what we talked about earlier. What does freedom look like? And to really get an understanding of what we mean by barriers, what we mean by different institutions, and what a free society looks like. But then we get into other things, like how are you going to make a change? How are you going to tell a story? We've found, and think you'll agree with this, that people on the center right tend to be very facts and logic based. They want to just say, well, actually, when it comes to the minimum wage, statistically, what you'll find, you can talk about that all day long, and nobody's going to listen. As soon as they start hearing statistically, they're going to go to sleep. But if you can tell a story, I had a friend who had a small business, and his employees loved him. But when this new higher minimum wage went into place, he had to cut some people loose because you just couldn't afford it. When you can tell a story, you can capture people's hearts. When you can capture people's hearts, you can tend to move their feet and their hands to action. And that's what the key is to move people from the seats to the streets. And a lot of the skills you find in level 1 help you do that.
That's awesome. And so if you have an interest in learning more or even getting a certification booked and on our schedule, simply email our general inbox, which is info@aspHQ.org, and we will get you plugged in to the right people to get that done and with the engagement director in your neck of the woods. But as a sponsor this year, once again, of the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference, we are so excited to be able to have the opportunity to offer a training there on Friday morning. And so the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference is coming up in just a month. And so it will take place Friday, March 27th and Saturday, March 28th at the Radisson in Harrisburg, same location where it's been for the past few years. And we are thrilled to welcome Jason Chaffetz as the featured speaker on Friday evening. But before that, there are a whole lot of programming opportunities for folks to enjoy. And Dwayne will be visiting the Keystone State Friday to deliver what is, I think, one of the most fascinating of all of the Insight to Action forums that his team shares with folks across the country. And it is called Becoming a Watchdog. And so will you just share a little bit about what you're going to cover with folks Friday?
There used to be a lot of watchdog journalists in the country, and that's something that's declining. And it's because mainly we see this hemorrhaging from print journalism. I think what I read recently is that most paper newsrooms are 40% emptier. They've cut that many people, and they just don't have the money to go out and do investigative reporting. Some of these stories that they would do would take 6 months to uncover everything. I mean, you're dedicating 2 people, or maybe a team of people to go out for 6 months and cover a story or research it, and they just don't have the money for that. And so who's doing it? Well, what we found is that there are a lot of citizens out there who have the skill set to go out and pick up that mantle, pick up that torch essentially, and say, if this isn't getting done by the professional local news anymore, then we'll do it ourselves. It isn't a matter of there being a bias and so they're not covering it. It's a matter of they simply don't have the money to do it anymore. So what we'll be talking about is what that looks like and how to get it done, because it needs to be done. And it needs to be done bipartisanly. I don't care if they're a Republican or a Democrat. If they're corrupt, they need to be exposed. They need to have that sunshine put on them so that they can be seen for what they are. And that's a corrupt politician that's wasting taxpayer money. And I hope to teach some people how to do that, because I know I had a blast doing it when I was a local state level blogger, and it's something that can be done and needs to be done.
That's great. We are so excited to have you. Folks, visit paleadershipconference.org. Register today. We're just weeks out. It is going to be an incredible 2 days. There are still some big speakers yet to be announced, but we are so excited to meet you there, to visit with you and get to know you. Our entire team will be there. I will be presenting a panel on comprehensive tax reform, and I promise it will be more exciting than it sounds. And so we really look forward to seeing you. And so, Susan, I don't know if there's anything else. I know we've almost probably talked through the segment, but anything else that I could offer that I might have failed to mention question?
I can't think of anything, Ashley. It's very exciting to think about seeing you and hearing you and Dwayne at the Leadership Conference, which we are looking forward to also at the end of March. It's coming up very quickly, and comprehensive tax reform doesn't sound exciting, but it's definitely needed, and we all need to talk about it. So that's great, and it will be very interesting to hear what Dwayne has to say about the blogging that he's done and the very definite need for investigative reporting on the part of citizens. Excellent work
Wonderful.
That you all are doing.
It was so great to join you, Dwayne. Thanks for calling in. We so appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you both very much. And thank you, listeners, for joining us today on this edition of Citizens Bulletin, knowing your role as an informed Pennsylvania citizen. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Dwayne. And everyone, please join us again next week. Have a great week.